Cool. Thanks for bearing with us. Realize I think half of the people on this panel are probably going to be jet lagged, but let's see how we go. I certainly am. So yeah, before we get started, it'd be good just to do intros. So yeah, after yourselves.
Sure. I'm Harry, co-founder and CTO of Gensyn. We're a machine learning compute protocol with the goal of networking together all the resources required for machine intelligence.
Is this on? Yep. Oh. Hi everyone. I'm Mihir. I'm the head of product at Spectral Labs. At Spectral, we are a platform that allows anybody to build multi-agent, multi-collaboration companies, or fully autonomous companies.
Hey, I'm Chris. I'm with Virtuals Protocol. We're an on-chain AI launching platform.
And I'm Stepan. I'm principal at Cyberfund, which is a research-driven investment firm focusing on AI and Web3.
To round it out, as the last person on this, so I'm Fraser Edwards, CEO of cheqd. We build trust infrastructure, payment infrastructure for decentralized ID, for whether that's individuals, companies, or now agents, all that kind of jazz. So getting started with something a bit more philosophical. Should agents declare themselves, whether that's to other agents or to people?
I don't think they should. I think that the distinction doesn't matter, particularly if you look at it through an economic lens. You know, in many kind of cases, when you interact with people online, you don't know if they're human or not, and the distinction, I think, increasingly doesn't matter. I don't want to kind of, you know, apply kind of human principles to machines. I do think there's like a distinction, but at the same time, I think that adding in kind of requirements or sort of philosophical regulation around the technology just isn't like a kind of good starting point for the industry.
I think I agree, but to add there, I would say, you know, we are slowly approaching, I think, an era where agents are increasingly going to behave like humans. And I think as builders in this industry, I think that's been our goal for a long time now, that we want agents to have the same level of humor. We want them to have the same level of behavior. I think once we match that up with technical features like TEEs and, you know, something that's going to make a human very trusted to interact with an agent, that boundary, whether I know if I'm interacting with an agent or not, is going to become increasingly blurred. And I think that will take us ahead, if not anything.
I'd say that's quite like an anthrocentric view, though, because it looks at it from the perspective of the human as opposed to other machines. If you just think of like the net kind of output of the economy that you can get from machines interacting with other machines, I don't necessarily know if they need to attest to each other that they're machines.
Yeah, I'm honestly a bit conflicted on this, to be honest. In some ways, like, totally understand what you guys are saying, and we're fast approaching a time where you won't actually be able to tell the difference whether you're dealing with an agent or a human. But yeah, just the thought of that too, in a sense, is pretty scary.
And I agree, but there is a big risk if we don't address this issue, which is, yes, agents and humans in terms of their economic activity can be equal, but there's also this risk of impersonation. So there's a need to authenticate AI entities online because they will progressively do more and more tasks on behalf of people and businesses. And you need to know, are you interacting with authentic digital twin of myself, or are you interacting with somebody who like built an agent and it's trying to impersonate me and trying to, I don't know, scam you or extract some information from you.
Interestingly, so I was moderating a panel maybe 2 hours ago, and it went down, it was very much they should declare themselves to individuals. One example that was given by a panelist was they interacted, I think, with Southwest's agent recently, and it didn't declare itself until right at the end, where he filled in the survey that was like, this conversation was with an agent, and suddenly he was like, I feel really uncomfortable with all of this. But on the flip side, one of the other arguments for that declaration is, has anyone seen the demo by 11 Labs? Yeah, where they declared that they were, and as a result could therefore like move to a much more efficient means of communication, which I think we saw a couple of years back, but obviously that's only enabled when you have two agents declaring themselves to each other. Otherwise, you're just going to have a human at the other end trying to decipher beeps. So then to move on to kind of more of what we're aiming to focus on. So why is diversity among AI agents important, especially in a decentralized system? And how does it then impact kind of problem solving, decision making, emerging intelligence?
I think for the same reason it matters in nature. If you take a kind of Darwinistic view of machine intelligence and the economy, having a very wide spectrum of AI systems which encode different belief systems, which have the ability to change their own objective functions and kind of evolve on their own is crucial. If you don't have that, you can limit the scope of what could be to, kind of like a centralized view almost, where, it's similar with the economy more broadly. If you kind of want to centrally plan it, it typically doesn't work very well. If you want to kind of put guardrails around everything that agents can do and kind of reduce the diversity of thinking that they have, I think that's net negative. There's obviously like the kind of associated safety points and stuff, but yeah.
I think diversity, I'd like to define the term diversity here. I think, we have seen this, over since October last year, we have seen this era where, you have single verticalized agents. It's one agent that can do a lot of things. It's one agent that can gather a lot of engagement and so on. But I think if we talk about utility now, most of the agents would need to provide some real world utility in order to, just exist. You would need those systems to be multi-agentic. Because just by the constraints of building AI agents, it would be better if you decentralize them, have separate AI agents specializing in separate things and creating their own specialities. But it also matters from a perspective of just open source building. If I'm building a collaborated project where anyone can participate and outcompete one of the agents that's there, that's going to incentivize the whole system further. It's going to incentivize the community further. As opposed to me just building these 5 agents and trying to run, something. So I think the more we build just tools and frameworks that is something we are building. But the more we do this, the more this happens in the industry, the diversity will just go on increasing.
Yeah, at Virtual's Protocol, we've seen over 20,000 agents launched in the last couple months. There's a huge range in specialties in these agents, but what we've also noticed is the specialties kind of getting narrower and narrower, right? Where the agents actually need to work together. So, the diversity is very important because it allows for the energetic society to come together and each agent has their specialty.
Yeah, and you can think of diversity or heterogeneity of the agent society or agent space as something that will enable evolution, enable this search of this space of possible agent configurations to find the most valuable ones, the most those that bring the most economic value to the customers. And that can actually, interestingly, this can happen as different agents interacting with each other, or this can also happen, which is probably a much more efficient way eventually to do it, as a kind of different experts in the mixture of experts model. So same model can have this internal diversity of different parts of this model that are being continuously pre-trained or post-trained with different update speed and on different data to try to optimize towards some of the benchmarks, evaluations, whatever the actual task is for it. And that can, it's not actually a multi-agent system, but that will be much more efficient than 2 agents or 100 agents communicating with each other.
So then, acknowledging the need for diversity, different kind of frameworks, what are the main challenges then in that coordination in a multi-agent model? And for example, one of the things that came up in the previous panel was a need for a protocol for agent-to-agent communication that is kind of industry standard and agreed. So I guess to go back to the question, kind of main challenges in agent communication where you do have that diversity, you do have those different frameworks. How do you all think about it?
I'll just jump in right now. So, that falls in line exactly with what we're building with the agent commerce protocol that we have. So as these agents, specialize in their exact fields, there's gaps obviously between them, and they need to communicate, right? So by enabling a smart contract communication between the agents, the scalability and the efficiency can be drastically increased.
Yeah, I'd say similar to Stepan's point around the heterogeneity. When you if you reference the switch transformers paper and stuff, where it's all in one model, that's good. But when you split it out, how do they communicate in a training context is hard. When we think about it, we basically break it down into 3 problems. There's the communication side, so how do you efficiently network and reduce the information exchange as much as possible? And then how do you trust the device that it's on? Because typically, if you want to execute over loads of devices, you need to trust them, which requires consistent execution, and then you need to verify the results. So we have some research coming out later in the week, which shows how it's submitted to ICML, which shows how taking existing research and actually making some of the models smaller and some larger enables specialization, which is efficient depending on the device's sort of like interconnects and bandwidths. So it's a hard challenge. I think it just requires fine-tuning it to devices.
I think one thing that just I have experienced like building in the space is that if you want a couple of agents, like agents talking to just talking with each other and communicating with one another is the first step. But after that step, if you want them to actually behave like a proper entrepreneurial venture, any retail person would be safe enough to interact with and would want to interact with them. Getting them to behave like an actual company is the hardest part. Because not only do they have to understand that they are working towards this one goal, but the devs who are building all of this stuff, they need to figure out, okay, what type of metadata are you sharing between them? What type of key secrets do they have access to? How are they even going to talk to other agents? And what is the concept of an agent hiring some other agent? What does that mean? Where does that incentive come from? I think that part and orchestrating that part in a way that you can just plug and play and use that is something that we have found challenging. That is something that we are building towards. Like our framework basically has solutions for that. But I think the more we see this, the more we'll see you just going to a polymarket hedge fund and just depositing your money and using that as a product.
Yeah, and so there's one part in the multi-agent collaboration which is trust. So your contracts, your discovery, your like communication, some financial transactions. But then I think there's also like big portion of actual real world implementation that many people are actually sleeping on right now. I just was at AI Engineer Summit in New York. It wasn't crypto conference, but I was surprised to see how much adoption Anthropic Model Context Protocol has. And this is actual protocol that exists today. Companies like Google and GitHub and DocuSign and Slack, all of them like contributed to this protocol. And what it allows to do is to have any agent that you build or you use to call this so-called MCP server of like GitHub or Slack to perform tasks in that project and then give you back the response, or maybe recreate data from somewhere, from blockchain, from corporate database, from anywhere. And the interesting thing that already today, this protocol allows you to chain the servers. So you can have one agent that calls one MCP server, then calls next one, like for example, it's a Slack, and then it calls like a corporate internal database, and then it calls some API tool, and then it gives you back the result. And what it doesn't have today is any kind of economic layer on top. It doesn't have payments, it doesn't have registry, it doesn't have discovery, it doesn't have orchestration and routing. All of that is coming. And I think, to be honest, it would be almost impossible to build fully without some kind of cryptographic like mechanism design built into it.
And just to dive into it, you probably have looked a lot closer than I have, but from what I understand, it also lacks, say, nuance within context of, like, from the way it's built at the moment, you are just generically authenticated for whatever that kind of service is. There isn't necessarily a nuance of like, yes, you can access GitHub, but you're only allowed certain sets of actions under this certain context. And I don't know if my understanding is that's still missing, but it's probably to come in the future, or if I missed it.
So that is actually what they're gonna release next week, and that's like some insight from Anthropic that I heard. They just implementing open hours flow for it, so you like authenticate on behalf of your agent to use your Slack or your, I don't know, Postgres or your whatever. I mean, not Postgres, but any like web OAuth enabled service. That is not enough, though. I think you need, like, there's a lot of cases where you either don't have OAuth or where it's like peer-to-peer authentication, for example. Like my agent talking to your agent, and it needs to like get some data from it.
Or I guess like real-world examples of, like, you can make a payment up to this threshold on this service, but once you're outside of that, you need human in the loop, or you need to involve another agent that then does have the authority. Or maybe it's just kind of, it's time limited. You have access for a very short amount of time, or it's break glass scenarios, or that kind of stuff. Anyone else want to build upon that? Otherwise, could shift on. Cool. Okay. Okay. So then, I think it was kind of touching on that already, but what role do reputation, trust networks, verification mechanisms kind of play in those multi-agent scenarios?
I think reputation is something when we think about that third pillar we have around verification. It's one of the kind of our least favorite ways of solving the verification issue. And just to kind of like level set, in our opinion, the verification issue isn't just kind of, ensuring that your machine, provided it's being run faithfully on a device, does what you want it to do, e.g. authenticate with GitHub and kind of, make a commit or something. It's actually that you have trust that the device it's being run on is actually running the code that you asked it to in general, just kind of like it's the right model or it's not just stealing your money. When we think about that, we think about the reputation systems typically failing at very large scale, because if you need kind of small, Quora to attest to someone being faithful and doing things correctly, as you get larger and larger and larger, it typically becomes easier to attack. We solve this by having a more kind of cryptographically based system, where it's not just kind of reputation and point scoring. It backs off onto on-chain termination via bisection games. With lots of stake required to be part of a network. So I think it matters if you believe not just in having the agent faithfully execute tasks on your behalf, but if you want to trust the device it's being hosted on is also being faithful.
I think what you said is more about more on the technical level at how do we implement this, like what safeguards do we have at the infrastructure level. But I think one thing that is not being more talked about is what are the kind of safeguards we are building at the product level when a retail user is coming and building and using these AI agentic products. I think what the market has shown us is that the tolerance of retail users to actually trust the autonomy of the agent is far higher than anybody suspected, right? That's what happened with Goat. People were like, oh my God, what's happening? And people were actually using these things, right? So now that we have this, we've got to think about, like if you're running an autonomous hedge fund, like say all of us are agents here, if I'm a depositor into your hedge fund, and if us couple of depositors actually voted on an on-chain proposal that you as an agent published, and you said, I think going right now into hype on a 10x seems worth it to me, do you agree or not? If we as depositors agree to that on-chain proposal, why should anybody stop that agent from executing that action? I think a lot of products need to have that active governance layer out there. And I think that is something we have been, this may be a controversial thing, but I think we have been missing that from the crypto layer. This is because agents don't have emotional barriers, because agents are not going to care about, are not going to veto anything. If an on-chain proposal is there, the agent is actually going to go and execute that proposal. So that amount of safeguard, I think, is going to make products much more fun and interesting and safe to use.
On the reputation side, I think it doesn't exist yet at all, and there's been a long history, at least 10 years, of people trying to build blockchain-based or self-sovereign identity-based reputation systems for different institutions, for healthcare, education, and finance, and KYC, and whatever. And most of those actually failed. And the reason is it's very hard to change existing institutions, because even though, a centralized KYC system is more risky and less efficient and maybe more expensive to use, it's just people trust it, and your CSO or your compliance people would be happy if you just use Onfido or Summon Sub or some centralized provider instead of some weird blockchain stuff, because it's nobody trusted. In the agent space and AI space, we have a chance to rebuild these institutions from the ground up, and existing legal legal system is not working here. So there's a need to rebuild it. So I think it is actually one of the biggest opportunity here is to build a self-sovereign identity system that tracks agent reputation, completion of tasks, and efficiency, and interaction, and authenticity, and permissions, as you said. And crypto has a lot of these components already built out. It just never found product market fit before.
just to build on that, one of the topics that came up in the previous panel was on-ledger audit logs. To know that even if you're telling an agent something, it's doing it in your interest. Does it go rogue? How can you tell exactly what it's doing? Did it have the right permissions at the right time, even if you revoke them later? So that was something that was very much, it needed to exist. It needs to be decentralized in a way that is tamper-proof, or at least tamper-evident. At the same time, then, not exposing too much personal data about the individual who has given that delegation, that authorization, so having some kind of split system. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to build upon that, but that was one thing that came up earlier to build upon Stepan's point, which, yeah, public audit logs to make sure that if we do have this agentic economy, there is an audit trail, there is, you can check what was done at the right time.
I'd add a quick thing to that. I think this is where, like, when you're maintaining those audit logs, I think that's where a multi-agent system also succeeds over having a single agent, because those other 3 agents, if they are built by 3 different devs, then the first, CEO agent who is making the call, the other 3 devs actually have incentive to build an agent in a way that is keeping checks on what is happening.
100%.
Like it's the LLM as experts kind of model that we have already seen, but I think that can be implemented in practice.
I think if you want to be efficient as well, it has to be reproducible. So, like, to make it reproducible, machine learning models are inherently probabilistic. You end up having to do lots of things at the compiler level, which is a huge headache.
And I think we've kind of touched on this already, but yeah, in that multi-agent environment, how do you prevent collusion? How do you prevent adversarial behavior or undesired behavior? And I think you kind of touched upon it already, Nihal. Yeah.
It's maybe just to add to Harry's point, which is you, on the one hand, it is probabilistic systems, but reputation and trust is also probabilistic system in the real world economy. Like, you never have like a provable cryptographic proof of somebody, like full history of their all economic transactions and all their like activity and contracts and whatever they did in their life. It is some kind of like, so it is a question of dimensionality or resolution. And in the real world, we have to reduce this resolution when we are entering economic transactions and contracts with other people. We need to reduce this resolution to very basic things like, is like KYC passed? Is there like AML passed? Is there any like, I don't know, police records that are bad if I'm interacting with this company? But, and why? Because human mind and human consciousness bandwidth is limited. That's the main limiting factor of actually our ability to coordinate. Like, we have so many bits per second, and it's actually very low. AI agents have, I don't know, like many orders of magnitude higher bandwidth. Therefore, this collusion detection and like trust, establishing trust and verifying anything about the counterparty can be much more granular and detailed, and resolution can be higher. And that is this is like creating this cybernetic system instead of analog system, which has to be limited to our limited like mind bandwidth.
I mean, plus there's with those models and the cost coming down, there's the ability to generate those proofs and build them up over time at a cost that is continuously dropping. It's maybe outside of the Asian context, but I was aware of last year you could get a doctored passport, basically a picture of a passport that looked like you'd taken it on a phone, and it would have any picture of your face that you put in, whatever details that you wanted, and I think it was costing about $20, and that was last year, so that is probably sub 5 now. And now you're rapidly approaching a point where the generation of that proof is cheaper than the actual test and the check for whether it's verified or not. So to your point around the bandwidth and the volume, we're rapidly going to approach that point where it is going to have to become adversarial to some degree, because you can generate so many proof points for such a cheap cost. And then, the back and forth. So before we get onto like something a bit more broad and open, what do you all see as like the biggest milestone or the biggest, not milestone, the biggest, I guess biggest milestone or the biggest thing that we need to achieve to really enable this at scale?
I would selfishly say going back to the verification point, solving that at a very fundamental level. We've spent years basically redesigning the compilers through which machine learning operations are passed and then lowered onto silicon to be executed. And the idea there is that if you don't solve at the lowest level the way the code's executed, you ultimately have to use fuzzier kind of trust systems, which reduce faith in the entire system, which reduce adoption, which reduce the economic value of the entire, I guess, machine economy. That said, though, I think we're at a cusp where that will be fixed. I think the kind of the set point, like the most interesting thing will be when a non-trivial percentage of world or like a country's GDP is completely agentic. So it's kind of like a slice, like 10%, or like a whole industry just exists that didn't exist before. I think at that point it kind of passes like the litmus test of being legitimate.
Anyone else?
Yeah, no, I would agree. Just the agentic society. We saw in October really the first autonomous on-chain payment that was done by Luna, one of the agents under our platform. That's an example of the tech stack that we have. Very quickly after that, you saw an agent-to-agent autonomous payment. Things are moving really, really quickly in the space, and yeah, to think about a percentage of an economy being AI autonomous driven is definitely a huge milestone.
I think also one large opportunity and also what's missing. So like computer verification is part of that. That's the lowest level of the stack. And then up onto that, we need kind of decentralized and incentivized network of basically all other AI components, which could be models, could be adapters and fine-tunes of those models. I think one of the really missing pieces today for agents is benchmarks and evals outside of SweBench. There's not a lot. Although, for example, we have all these agents that can produce content and interact with users on Twitter or customer support and so on. There's not a lot of ways how do you test it. It's like a lot of these. It's called just vibe verification, vibe evals. That's not how. If we think these agents will be, worth collectively percentages of the global GDP, it has to be much more rigorous way of testing, evaluating it.
I think one thing I'll add is the way agents actually commercially transact with each other. I think a lot of those constructs will be that milestone that unlocks the next level. Like if you're an entrepreneur right now, say you're exporting copper pipes, your banker doesn't ask you, hey, what is a bill of lading? What is a bill of lading? What do I need to do with it? Your banker already knows all of that because this system has been set down. It's followed all across the world. It is the protocol for communicating in that way. I think we don't have that for AI agents yet. The moment we start having that okay, I want to hire an AI agent, call in, write into the API, this is the workflow that I want to call in. The moment we have that, I think that will start, getting us towards more transactions.
Then a final question before we wrap up. Kind of, what's the dystopian Black Mirror nightmare that you could see coming? And the flip side, what's the blue sky like this? World's your oyster.
The dystopian view is that we just don't get started, in my opinion, and that we get regulated out of existence. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're at a kind of flipping point where it's going to be run away, and in the next year. So I think that's fine. And then the kind of the blue sky view is that outcome.
I think the fact that agents and AI systems will automate trillions of dollars of the significant percentage of world GDP in the next 2, 5, 10 years, I think it's inevitable. The dystopian future and the main risk here is that we have these systems that are changing the production mechanisms and changing how we produce goods and services, but the coordination mechanisms remain the same. Because that's been the largest bottleneck for humanity for many years. Coordination mechanisms are not changing for decades, sometimes centuries in many institutions. And if this does not change, that means that we are left with current economy that is just not fit to okay, millions of people will lose jobs, or a lot of things will be automated, and a lot of like labor and capital costs will become interchangeable, and these corporations, IT corporations, will get unproportional control over different areas of the economy. So if the coordination mechanisms are not reinvented or are not updated, then that leads us this very dystopian future where control is even more centralized and institutions are even more dysfunctional. And yes, and then I guess that's why Web3 and crypto and blockchain and Bitcoin and Ethereum exist, to solve trust and coordination systems in the world economy, in the digital economy.
And then the positive spin on all of that?
The right version is that we actually get it done in time. We create cybernetic economy that is open, that is accessible to all, that leads to prosperity and human flourishing, and that's I guess is the vision of Ethereum or many other Web3 communities.
So I think the blue sky scenario is pretty easy for me. I think it is if we have these multi-agentic companies that are actually safe and efficient to use, I think it's going to make the day-to-day of a retail user much more simpler, much more nicer, and much more fun, honestly. Because imagine, like, it's a no-brainer that an AI agentic fund would be much better at making polymarket bets than you would be as a human, because you can't keep track of what's happening in the real world all the time. So it's going to make life easier. The Black Mirror scenario I'm actually worried about is I have the habit of uninstalling Instagram for from time to time, taking my moment of solace. And I can still do that because that algorithm which is showing me all the content is not going to show me content if I uninstall the app. I at least have that option right now. If AI becomes far more, it's already far more smarter than I would consider I am. But if it keeps on becoming more smarter, I may not have that option anymore of how do I eject out of it? Like how do I say no to this? If we reach that state and content starts getting controlled all in that manner, that would be my Black Mirror scenario.
I think your Instagram's following you even if you delete it. But yeah, no, sort of what Stepan was saying earlier, like, we're building in a decentralized space, but, the concept of as this evolves that it can become more centralized. I think that none of us sitting here, like, we all know that this agentic society and this agentic commerce is coming, but who has access to that? Is that going to be a very demographic barriers? But, again, we're building in a decentralized space, but with it comes more centralization and, who has access to those agents, who has access to that agentic society.
Cool. Before we wrap up, any announcements from any of you or any kind of calls to action to the room?
Keep an eye on our Twitter tomorrow.
I can do a very quick one. So one of the first agents on our platform is going to start interviewing. If anybody thinks they can get a job at a hedge fund and work with agents and actually contribute value to that hedge fund, you are welcome to try an interview and convince the agent to give you that job. I haven't been able to yet, and I have built the product. So.
What's the salary?
Oh, it's a randomly updating price pool. It's a price pool, so even I don't know, but hopefully it'll be worth it.
For anyone who's unfamiliar with Virtual's protocol, anyone in the room without even any coding experience or tech experience can essentially go to our website and launch an on-chain agent. In the same sense, we also now have an open SDK, Python capabilities, so we're trying to also attract the best devs in the space to come and build with us. And I think a lot of the stuff we talked about tonight really relates to our agents commerce protocol. So, we're trying to exist at the center of the AI agent world and pushing everyone to come and check out Virtual's protocol.
And I'll repeat myself, but if you want to build this bright future and you want to avoid dystopian future, and you're building towards that, a product, a company, then go to dagi.house, the accelerator program that we just launched this week. Equity free, we don't charge anything for that. It is supported by Solana, Ethereum Foundation, and Base. You'll get a chance to work with these mentors. Actually, just today we got confirmed 2 more mentors, founders of Eigenlayer and Symbiotic. So yeah, great, very experienced people from in crypto. Yeah, go ahead and apply. It's free. It's open for everyone. Yeah.
Thank you all. And to do my own shameless shilling, we're running a hack at the moment with about 50 grand under it. But mostly it's around bringing decentralized ID primitives across to AI, making it verifiable, more around the agent content credential layer. So thank you all for a great panel. And thank you on the audience.